Welcome to the Michigan Golfer Show. Join us each week as we explore the people, the places, and the events that shape our great game.
Hi, I'm Jack Berry, and today I am with a fellow Michigan State alum, Harry Bowers, who is a notable golf architect in our state. Our state has a whole bunch of very famous and successful golf architects, and a number of them started out in the business, I think, at Michigan State. Is that right, Harry?
I think so. There seems to be quite a few.
When did you get out of state, and how did you get into designing golf courses?
I was 1983, and I had sent my resumes out like everybody else did to every golf course architect in the business. I did go through a dual bachelor degree program, so I did have a degree in turfgrass management as my backup. And Mr. Jones, Robert Trent Jones Sr., used to come out and give a talk to the two-year turfgrass students. Well, I was a four-year student, but Dr. Ken Payne was the head of the program for the two-year program, and he invited me to sit in because he knew what I wanted to do. And the second year, I kind of boldly went up and shook Mr. Jones's hand and slipped him a resume, and I doubled down by sending one to the office in Montclair, and I guess it was February. I hadn't even finished my last two courses in landscape architecture, and I got the call and went out to New Jersey and never looked back. I never did finish the last two classes. I've got my degree in turf, but not in landscape architecture.
So what about then from treetops? What happened?
Well, you know how memories are, Jack. But I went back to Montclair, and we were very busy at the time. Roger, the year before Treetops, Roger had done a golf course called Horseshoe Bay down in Texas, in Marble Falls, Texas, and it was the third of two other courses. I think Bobby was kind of instrumental in one of them, and Reese was instrumental in the other one, and the third one was called Apple Rock. And Roger had done that, and I think he won Golf Digest Best New Course of the Year. So we were kind of on a roll. I mean, we had a lot of projects going on. So I went back to doing some more renovation. I went over to Soto Grande and worked over there in Spain for just a little bit.
I've played Valderrama.
Yes, yeah. There's some great golf courses over there. The next big project I had was the Robert Trent Jones Golf Club in Manassas, Virginia. It wasn't called Robert Trent Jones Golf Club at the time, but I remember Roger had a little bit of a disagreement with Mr. Jones on the routing. And Roger used to smoke a pipe, and he was sitting back in his chair smoking that pipe and kind of just, I was going, Roger, my office was right across the hall. And he didn't say anything to me, and I sat down, and I thought, oh, something must be on his mind. And about 5 minutes later, he came in with a big roll of drawings, and he put them on my drafting table, and he said, here, it's yours. I'm not going to fight the old man on this. Well, it turned out to be one of the great clubs. They hosted 3 President's Cups in a row.
Right.
So, and the funniest thing about that, Jack, was like I told you, when we cleared the trees, we used to have to go and flag them. I did the routing, changed Roger's a few times. Roger, if there was one knock on Roger, he wasn't a real accomplished golfer. He was an avid golfer, but he wasn't real accomplished. So I had changed and moved a few holes onto some points that overlooked the Manassas Reservoir. And we got ready to go, and Mr. Jones said, I want you to go down and stake the golf course because I'm going to come down in a couple weeks. And that had never occurred before. Stake the golf course. We'd flag the golf course, but stake the golf course.
What's the difference between those two?
He wanted me to stake the center line. So he wanted me to put a stake at the back of each tee, a stake in the landing area, and a stake in the center of the green. Well, we always had surveyors do that. So I said, okay, I'll have the surveyors, go. No. I want you to go and stake the golf course. Well, I was fit to be tied. I didn't know what to do. I went into Roger. Roger started laughing. And he says, I told you, this is going to be a difficult job. And he said, that happened to me when I first started in like 1971. And I said, well, you can't take a topography map. And our topo maps back then, Jack, weren't that great. And it was wooded. It was heavily wooded. It's Northern Virginia. Anyway, Roger finally let me go a couple of days, and then he finally said, Harry, just stake the thing and then call the engineers and have them adjust it, and don't tell Mr. Jones. So that was the next big project after that.
Well, eventually you came back to Michigan and got into Domino's Farms there, and tell us, there was a little story about Jones was going to do a course there, and it's now where the buffalo roam or something.
It was very interesting. We had we got hired to do our second course in Michigan, and it was for Tom Monahan, the owner of Domino's Pizza, and he was building out his headquarters, and it was only about a third of the way constructed, and they had hired Arnold Palmer to design a golf course where the actual corporate headquarters is now, where all that farmland is and everything. There was going to be a golf course around it. And then further down Dixboro Road, he had a private residence, and he had another, I think it was 160 acres, 180 acres maybe. And it's right in that big S curve on Dixboro Road. And he hired Mr. Jones to lay out a golf course there. And I was the lead on that project. And during that whole process, two things happened within 3 months. A group approached Tom Monahan and said, we don't need a golf course around the headquarters, we should have a buffalo farm. And as you know, Tom Monahan could change his mind in a second. And pretty soon the Arnold Palmer golf course was gone, and there was a buffalo farm, a petting farm. The Jones course that we were in charge of had a tributary of the Fleming Creek that ran right into the Michigan Botanical Gardens. And there were enough environmentalists that were not going to allow that to happen. So they started with the fertilizer contamination in homes and septic fields, and before you knew it, those two projects were gone. And at the same time, I had built up a good relationship with the senior VP, Larry McGonigal, at Domino's Farms. At the same time, my wife, with my two young boys, had enough of living in Montclair, New Jersey. And we kind of had an ultimatum, and I wasn't going to put my job in front of my family. I was telling Larry McGonigal one evening that I was really in a tough spot. I had to leave my dream job, and the very next week, Domino's Farms called me up and asked me if I would come out and work for them. And I did, and shortly thereafter, they asked me to build a golf course in Drummond Island. So it went from, in a 6-month period, I went from, being very sad that I was probably going to lose this job, dream job of a lifetime, and 6 months later, I was back designing and building a golf course. So it all worked out.
Up in the lakes, way up north.
I can remember as a child going to Drummond Island with my uncle one time, and so I hadn't been back since then, but as a child, I remembered it being this very rugged wilderness, and it didn't change much.
Well, you became a kind of a dynamite architect, didn't you?
You know, Jack, at one point in time, that golf course became so difficult to build that I went back to Tom Monahan and I said, I know I told you that I could build this 18-hole golf course for $2.5 million, but I'm going to barely get the front 9 done for $2 million. And as rugged as it is, with the location and everything else, it's just a corporate retreat. For him at the time, it wasn't going to be open to the public. It was a sales tool. He was going to offer it to people throughout the whole company, all over the country, as an awards thing. So you're the best salesman of the month, so we're going to give you a 1-week vacation for you and your family up at my lodge. So I said 9 holes should be enough. But there were several very avid golf executives at Domino's, so we just kept going. And you're right, the dynamite, it got to the point where almost 30,000 linear feet of irrigation pipe was literally dynamited in.
The rock is, like treetops, appropriately named.
And I can't even remember who came up with that either. I can remember them going through sketches. Tom wanted sketches of the logo. And most of the sketches that I remember seeing early on, they looked like the old Flintstones logo, with the rock was all like chiseled rock. but I can't even remember who came up with it. It might have been Tom himself.
Well, it's a beautiful lodge up there, and he did fly a lot of celebrities up there, right?
He sure did. Matter of fact, we had the golf course routed, so we knew where that was going to go. And I got called into the office one time, and Monahan had these big leather baseball chairs. I don't know if you ever remember them, but they looked like a catcher's mitt. And when you sat in them, you sunk right down, you know. You kind of felt you were like intimidated. But I remember coming in, having a meeting, and Tom just looked over and he says, you know, I want an individual celebrity to be part of the design of each hole. 18 different celebrities. You know, okay. I'd never heard of that before, but okay. And before you know it, I'm talking to Bob Hope, and I went out and met Debbie Reynolds, and we had Al Kaline, and just a whole slew of them. And it turned out to be a wonderful experience. So, and J.P. McCarthy came up. It was great.
And you said that J.P. got on the tractor.
J.P. came up, and I don't know if maybe he was having too good time at the dinner, but he wanted to get on a bulldozer. He thought that would be neat. He'd never been on a bulldozer, and I was scared to put him on the bulldozer, but I grabbed one of the guys that was the operators that were doing what we call the feature shaping, and I said, listen, let him run this bulldozer, but don't you sit there with him. Don't let him get too crazy. And he just had a ball. He pushed a few big rocks around, and it was great. I had a great time.
Well, it's a good thing that Roger never got up on that job, because they do have bears on, on Drummond Island.
Yes. As a matter of fact, another cute story about that, my oldest son, Jeff, was, I don't know, maybe 8 years old, 6, 7, 8 years old. And we were clearing. They were knocking the trees down, so we're going through the same process as treetops. They're knocking the trees down. And I was letting my son, Jeff, just kind of run around, and he's climbing over logs and whatnot. And in the distance, here comes a black bear up by where the green was, and my son was about 100 yards ahead of me. And I saw the bear. I saw him. I'm yelling at him to get back. Well, the bear ran off. My son came back. But when my wife heard about that, that was the last time either of the boys got to come up to Drummond Island during construction.
Now, you had to use a lot of dynamite to get the irrigation lines in there. What were some of the other problems that you had there?
Well, we ran into what we would call outside of Michigan as cap rock or dome rock. You see a lot of it down in Texas. When we were down at Marble Falls, I could see it. And the rock just comes to the surface, and it almost looks like a paved parking lot. And if you go farther out on Drummond Island, out in the Maxton Plains, you'll see it. It's the rock is right at the surface, and it goes, you might see a football field of it. We ran into that in several areas out at the rock, and we didn't know what the heck to do with it. The guy that was dynamiting the irrigation came from the limestone quarry. He was an expert at shooting that dynamite, but we thought, well, we'll just dynamite that rock out of there. And he said, no, you understand, this is the mantle. This is Mother Earth. You can dynamite all you want. You're just going to find more rock. So we started thinking, well, we've got to cap it. We've got to put a layer of dirt on it. Well, there isn't a lot of dirt on Drummond Island. So we got talking about it, and actually Denny Bailey, who I think became one of the partners later on, was a local guy. He had a marina there. He also had a sand and gravel pit. And so we started just trucking in the sand out of Denny's pit, and I mean, we just kept it coming. We had off-road trucks from the quarry. I mean, you couldn't do it if you were in a residential area. Those trucks aren't even allowed to go on the road. They're off-road trucks. We just kept bringing them in. And you could actually, I don't know if it's like that today, but when it first opened, you could actually, when you took a divot, it made a funny sound. You weren't hitting rock, but I think that sound was bouncing 6 or 8 inches off the rock below, it didn't make this usual divot sound. You didn't hit rock, but it made a funny sound. But yeah, we capped a tremendous amount of the fairways. And of course the drainage is limited there because we were spending so much money to dynamite the irrigation trenches. You couldn't really go back and then dynamite all the drainage. So, you don't have a lot of fairway drainage. You tried to surface drain everything you could. It is, there's no doubt about it, the toughest job I'd have ever worked on in my career. And I've heard other people talk about, oh yeah, we had a real rocky site or this. I just finished a golf course in Argentina, and it's fairly rocky, similar to like northern Arizona. And I'm like, this is a piece of cake. And they're like, well, how are you going to do all these? It's not a problem. Trust me. Well, it all goes back to the rock. It goes back to Drummond Island. So I'll tell you another story how we got on the dynamiting issue. The irrigation contractor said, I know I've got a relationship with Vermeer, and Vermeer is a big equipment company. They do trenching and things like that. And the representative from Vermeer came. And he says, we've got a diamond-tipped wheel machine in Texas that I guarantee will cut right through this limestone. It cuts through granite. And so I'm talking at dinner one night to this local, and he said, and he worked at the quarry, and he said, that's not going to cut through this. This is blue limestone. This is tougher than granite. So we go back to the guy in the morning from Vermeer, and we said, okay, our guy's saying it's a waste of time. I tell you what, you let me bring this machine up. If this machine doesn't work, I'll take it back, no charge. Well, heck, the guys from Domino's were like, well, as long as they're not going to charge us for it. They brought that machine up. They had to take it apart, Jack, to get it on the ferry. It was so heavy. So it takes a whole day to take it apart in Detour, put it on the ferry, get it across the fairway. Then they got to put it all back together, put it on a truck to get it out there. And when that guy fired up that machine, I never saw more nuts and bolts popping off that thing. And in a half an hour, the guy shut it down and packed it up and took it back to Texas. So we were back to, now what do we do? And the guy said, hey, 3-finger Louie over at the quarry can dynamite all this, and that's the way it was. I can't remember, but he was missing a finger or two. But he was, for 30 years, he was the guy that shot all the dynamite at the limestone quarry, and now he's retired, so we hired him.
Well, you had a waterfall someplace on that golf course, too.
Yeah, I think it was back on the 15th hole. My memory's not as good as it used to be, but we had this area, and it was similar to the hole at Treetops, to be honest with you. That's what it reminded me of. It wasn't quite as dramatic. The drop was only about 40 or 50 feet from tee to green. And, of course, the views weren't like Treetops because it was mainly pine and cedar trees and whatnot. But it kind of reminded me of that. And it was on, the tees were on a rock ledge, and they stepped down almost perfectly, but it was rock. And then when you got down to the green, it was all rock. So we started thinking about it, and somebody, I don't think it was Tom, because Tom didn't come out to the golf course very much, but it was one of the fellows that was working for Tom and that was kind of a golf nut. And I think it might have been Kaline's hole. I can't remember for sure, but one of the ball players, I think it was Kaline, or maybe George Kell. It might have been George Kell. He said, boy, that would be great if you did this, if you had a waterfall. If water was coming over here, wouldn't it be great? Well, that's one thing they've got plenty of is water up there. So they pounded a well and got the water, and we got a local guy to fit all the rock in, and it kind of manufactured, Jack, to be honest with you. But
it wasn't Niagara Falls.
No, but they loved it. They loved it. So.